Hello YouTube and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to do a complete brake job on a 2007 Mazda CX-9. This same process will also work for the Ford Edge and several of the other Ford SUV models. So if you want to learn everything there's to know about doing a brake job on a Mazda CX-9, then stay tuned. All right, let's talk about safety. Safety is absolutely critical when you're working on a car, truck, RV, whatever you're working on in the shop. Safety is absolutely critical. I can't stress it enough. Now here's my disclaimer. I'm not responsible for you on how you lift your vehicle or how you turn wrenches. You've got to decide to be safe. I'm going to give you the basics on the safety equipment. I'll give you the basics on lifting the vehicle. But it's really up to you, and you better get it right, because a vehicle weighs, 3,000 pounds, 3,000 pounds. They will kill you if you make a mistake. So take it to heart. So here's my basics for lifting the vehicle and keeping it safe. I use a 2.5 ton Craftsman jack. You can use anything you wish as long as it's got the capability to lift your vehicle. Whatever that weight is can be found in your owner's manual. Find out what it is. Make sure you go over that amount with your with this piece of equipment so that you got plenty of room and you don't stress out your jack. So I like the speed jack better than the bottle jacks and other types of jacks. I think they work a lot better in the shop. It's up to you how you get your vehicle raised up. Once I get the vehicle up to the height I'm looking for, then I always support it with jack stands. And I like the type of jack stands that lock into place. They lock in automatically. You have to pull the handle up to release them, and you can't pull it up if they're under a load. So you can't accidentally kick them and knock the car off of the jack or knock the car down. I use one on each side. I don't generally suspend one side and then the other. Some people do. I don't. I always chock the back tire. I usually use a couple of blocks and I chock both back tires. And I also use safety glasses, because you can't replace your eyes. You can't replace, a hand or arm or something if you get it trapped or caught underneath your vehicle. But your eyes are absolutely critical. Go buy you a good set of safety glasses. These particular safety glasses, since I'm getting up in age, these actually have bifocals built into them, so I can see when I'm looking at things close up. I highly recommend you invest in this type of equipment if you're going to do your own repairs on your vehicles, because these will save you over and over again, and you can't be too safe. So take my word for it, take my advice, get some good safety equipment, good jack stands, and then go to your owner's manual, find out the lifting points for your vehicle, and lift them at those points exactly like the manufacturer specifies. That way you'll be safe, you'll get your vehicle up in the proper height, you'll get everything suspended properly, and you won't have a problem. All right, let's talk about some tools real quick. These are all the basic tools that you're going to need to perform the job. There's always going to be some changes. It's really dependent on the make and model that you're trying to do this job on. But for the most part, this will get the job done for you. Of course, you're going to start off with a lug wrench to get the lugs off. You can use, this is my favorite because it's the best way to get them off, but you can use the one that's factory in the truck, car, van, RV, whatever. There's one there, you can use it. I personally don't like to take those in and out. I like to keep them intact. So I have this speed wrench there that I use to take my lugs off with. An assortment of sockets, again, depending on what vehicle you're going to be doing. They'll either be SAE or they'll be metric. I've got both. I've got every kind of tool you can imagine. You're going to need a hammer, a breaker bar probably for the bolts that hold on the actual caliper mounts, because they usually are pretty tough, and I can sometimes get them off with it or without it, but breaker bar would probably be advisable. You're going to need an assortment of wrenches. I like to use the close-in wrenches because I don't like the open-end wrenches too much. They tend to slide off, and I don't like that. Again, you're based on what you're going to be doing. Is it SAE or is it metric? It's up to you. A variety of cleaning brushes. I like to use brass, that way it doesn't hurt anything. This is for your caliper to push the cylinder back in on the caliper. I also use a nice big pair of pliers as well, because sometimes this is hard to get going, but this will get it going, and then you can start and then you can finish with this. Again, when you take the rim off, you're going to want to hit everything with some brake cleaner. That's where a good set of gloves come in. These are throwaways, of course. I think I got these at Harbor Freight. They're, you know, $7.95 a box of 100 or 50 or whatever they are. But have a box of those. You're going to go through several sets of them. You're going to tear some of them up, but they will absolutely save your hands. They'll keep all the brake cleaner and all the other junk off of your hands. Keep them pretty clean. Shop towels is always good, but you can use, you know, just regular towels that you cut up or whatever, old t-shirts. I always use a box underneath wherever I'm going to use the brake cleaner. I want to catch all the grime and everything. I don't want it to get on my floor. Again, that's up to you if you want to do that. You know, you can buy these at AutoZone, or you can buy them at Walmart pretty cheap. These are some hangers that I made for the calipers. We're going to want to suspend the calipers, and as I get into the actual replacement, I'll show you. But I made these out of clothes hangers. I've got one for each side, and I use it to hook up on, you know, one of the coils, and then I hook it onto the caliper, and I keep the weight off the caliper. And as we go through the install, I'll show you why these are important. These are very important. So if you don't have any, you can use bungee cords. You know, it's a personal preference, whatever you want. Anyway, this is a basic look at everything you're going to need to basically do the brake job. You're going to need one flat tip. You probably need, I don't know what size of Phillips, but most of the rotors are on with a Phillips head, and it's the larger one. I don't know that it'll be the smaller one. Generally, it's the larger one. You're going to need something like this to take the caliper off, because it's probably going to be seized in there pretty good, and you're going to need to pry it away. But, you know, as we go into the install, I'll go through all these and as I'm using them so you can see, and we'll keep going. I recommend that you go ahead and take your lugs loose while you have the vehicle on the ground. That puts a lot of pressure on the rim and tire itself, keeps it locked in to the ground, so you can get these off easy. Once you put these up on the jack stands, it gets a lot tougher, especially on the free wheeling axles. If you've got a two-wheel drive and the front drive doesn't pull, then it just spins and it makes it really difficult. So I highly recommend that you keep them on the ground, go ahead and loosen the lugs up, then lift the vehicle up. You know, when I say loosen them up, I mean just crack them, you know, just to get the pressure off of them so that they're loose. Don't take them all the way loose and have the car fall off of them. Just crack them and make sure they're loose, do both sides, then go ahead, jack the vehicle up and move on. This particular vehicle, this is a Mazda CX-9, and it has it's got one of these security pieces in it that I always have to take off first. So I always do that first. Make sure you get a good grip. Make sure you got good center balance so that you don't hurt your back. Try not to use your back if you can. And just make sure that you do it properly. Find the right size here. It's always good to get the right leverage. And I'm just breaking them loose. Not trying to take them all the way off. And you can torque them back down when you're done. There's always a torque specification in your manual, or you can Google it if you want to know what to torque them back on. Okay, so I've got them all loosened up. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then we'll get the vehicle lifted up and get the jack stands under it, and then we'll start at it from there. I just want to give you a quick idea of how I set my jack stands up. I make sure they're centered under a beam, an actual I-beam of the vehicle, or unibody strut, something that's rated to hold the weight, and I make sure I got it in there solid and it's balanced. This is the way I set my vehicles up. Chalk the back tires. I lift it up one side at a time, and then I get these in place, and then I actually set the jack down, and I just leave it over there on the side, you know, just in case. for extra safety. But this is how you should do it. It differs for every vehicle. So make sure you check with your owner's manual and find out exactly how you're supposed to lift yours, and do it the right way and do it the safe way. Now we'll get on into the brake replacement. The thing I do is I always get my tools somewhat organized. I have everything within my hand reach. I have a little stool that I use, a little roller stool, but you can use a bucket, whatever you want to do. I get as much light on the situation as I can because I'm old and I need to have that extra light to see well. So the first thing I'm going to do, since this isn't a just a straight replacement, we're going to replace everything. I'm going to go ahead and take off the brake pads, the caliper and brake pads first. Then I'm going to go ahead and take the caliper guard and everything back. In this particular vehicle, you don't have to remove this to suspend your brake caliper, but in some vehicles you do, and there's usually a bolt on the back, and this actually can be removed or just cut loose, and then you take and hook it up here, hook the caliper up wherever you want to. Just make sure you suspend that weight, but I'll go through that as we go along, so it won't be a problem. So here we are. We've got everything lifted up and secured, everything as safely as possible. I've got all my tools organized around me. First thing I'm going to do is remove the caliper and suspend it. Then I'm going to take the caliper bracket loose from the back, and then I'm going to replace the rotor, take the rotor out. This particular rotor is a vented and drilled rotor that I had on previously, more of a higher performance, and what I'm going back with this time is more of an OEM regular rotor. This one's held on with a Phillips, and you can see I keep everything lubed pretty well, so it's not too difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and work on getting this caliper off first. Mine is a 17. That it can all vary based on what you're doing and what vehicle you have. So you can use sockets, whatever you want, just whatever makes you feel comfortable. I'm probably a little more old school, so I'll tend to use just the regular wrenches quite a bit. And you're always going to get into something that's probably not going to be exactly what you thought, which is okay. I mean, you're just going to have to kind of work through it. And we're going to replace these. I've got about 63,000 on this vehicle. It's a 2007. So I've done these several times, of course, and I'm going to replace the pins and everything on these this time because I saw some wear on them last time. So I'm not going to try to reuse any of the hardware except maybe the thin holders that hold the pads in place. Usually you can just clean those up. And I see one of these has actually come loose, so it's good that I'm doing this because that gets a lot of dust and grime in there, and that makes your pin stop sliding back and forth. So I'd say my timing was probably pretty good on these. Yeah, that's pretty dried out. Got a lot of wear marks on it. These are definitely done, so we definitely want to replace those. If you take a screwdriver, you can go right in here between the bracket and the caliper, and you can just push. See, that thing is completely loose in there. So thankfully, we were doing this when we did. So I'm going to get that loosened up, and I'm going to get the bottom loose. And again, I mean, you're going to have to, sometimes you got to do some prying and some pulling to get these things to come in. Now you noticed I kept my hand on that. I kept my hand on this because I didn't want to put any pressure on that hose. Because if you put too much pressure on this hose right here, you're going to be in trouble. And if you bust one of them, and you got a whole nother big job in front of you. So take one of these. I made this out of a clothes hanger, and I go ahead and I suspend this up like that. Just keep it out of the way. As long as it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother me. So now you can see you got the brake pads here. Let's see what they look like. These are just came right out. And I mean, there's still a good amount of brake pad left on that, but I'm doing the entire replacement because I have a long trip coming on. So, but these, these don't look too bad. They've got just normal wear and tear on, so they don't look bad at all. The clips don't look too bad either. They look like they just need to be cleaned up. So we'll do that before we put everything back in again. We will clean those up with a wire brush and take care of that. I'm glad I looked at these because, like I said, this one was completely off in the back. That wasn't good. So we'll go ahead and get the bracket off now. There was also one tool that I didn't mention, and that is a rubber hammer. And they're also pretty handy for these types when you've got them torqued down. And you can hit these with a rubber hammer, and it's even better than hitting them with a metal hammer, because that rubber will react to it, and it will make it a lot easier to take it off. Again, make sure that you follow the specifications for putting these back on, and make sure you torque them properly, because this is your holding your front entire brake system on, so you want to make sure that's good. There's your caliper bracket, and this one's in pretty good shape. It just needs to be cleaned up, and then I'll reseat this. You can see that had a lot of grime and stuff in it, so obviously that pin was definitely going to be going bad if it wasn't already bad, but I wasn't hearing any squeaking. So anyway, that's off. Now what we got left now is the rotor, and need the large size Phillips for mine. Some of them are bolts. It just depends, and sometimes these can be really, really hard to get off, and if they are, then you'll have to find something else to help you get a better grip on them. And that's what I'm going to do right now, and then I'll be back. What I ended up having to do was actually something that's a little bit more difficult. This Phillips head bolt that was holding the rotor on was seized up. So what I ended up having to do is I went and got this tool. This is actually my tool, and this is an impact remover for these types of very difficult screws. It has a end on it that you actually take a hammer and you put it in here. It's got different kinds of tips in the one that I have. I put it in here and I actually hit it with this hammer, and that loosened this up to where I could free it. Then I went ahead and just took it off. If you have a vehicle that needs that, you're going to be able to see that this is probably pretty, it's pretty rusted. So anyway, if you've got a vehicle and you can't get this off, you don't have to go buy one of these. I happen to have one because I've been mechanicking for so many years. You can go to AutoZone or any of your major branded auto parts stores, and they will let you get this signed out for free. Any kind of specialty tool like this, you can generally get it from them, and you don't have to buy it. I just happen to have it, and when I put this back in, I'll have to make sure I clean it up and lube it. So now we've got this off. It looks like I've got quite a bit of rust and just dirt and everything around this. I'm going to hit it a couple whacks just to see if it comes loose. So I hit this with some penetrating oil, and then I took a couple more hits at it with the rubber hammer, and it broke right loose. It really wasn't on too hard after that. So then I'm going to go ahead and work this off. There's the rotor out, and I got a lot of good life out of this rotor, so I'm not going to complain too much about it. It held up pretty good. So, but anyway, this all looks pretty good, and the bearings and everything look good. This is a front wheel drive. Went ahead and did a spot check on it. It all looked good, so I'm going to go ahead and clean everything up here and lube everything up, and then I'm going to start reversing the process. All right, we're going to go ahead and unbox. This is a kit that I purchased from Max Advanced Brakes. This is a complete set, front and back, rotors, pads, and hardware. I purchased this through Amazon.com. Max Advanced makes a lot of different brake kits for all types of cars. I'm pretty sure you can probably find the right one for your car. But this is a kit that I decided to go through for this build. I've used other kits before, but this is the first time I've used the Max, so we're going to go ahead and unbox this and see what we got. You can see these are the carbon ceramic. And of course the front will be quite a bit larger than the back. Nice, very well protected. Also got some brake service recommendations here on the box, which are pretty nice. A couple different languages there. Again, these will be the front, yeah. Of course, the front's almost double the size of the back, but same thing here. Brake service recommendations here in English and Spanish, a couple others. Gives you some information on them, what they're all about. Pretty clear, lifespan, different information. So that's pretty good. So I have those. Have the rotors, pads. Now I've got some hardware I'm going to go grab, and then we'll take a look at it real quick, and then we'll move on. Now I want to go ahead and talk about replacing the brake hardware. And this is probably one of the most important things that, 90% of the people that do their own brakes and rotors don't do. And that is go ahead and replace the pins, your caliper pins. That is really, really critical. And as we get into the installation, I'll actually show you why. I ordered these from AutoZone. A lot of them, they don't carry these particular items in stock. You can go to AutoZone. I couldn't even find these on Amazon, but I did go to AutoZone. I gave them the information. They ordered them for me. And of course, you got front and rear set, and they are quite a bit different. This is the rear set. This is the front set. So anyway, this is critical as we get into the actual replacement of the pads. I'll show you why this is so important. And these ran me $10.99, and I can't stress it enough how important it is to replace these. Because if you have any wear on these, that's how come you get that binding on your pads, like, a month or two later, start getting some squeaking noises. It's because you had some worn out pins and you didn't replace them. So I highly recommend that you replace these when you do this complete job. After I did a good inspection of the old rubber and of the caliper bracket, I determined that I needed a new set of the actual brake hardware, the brake hardware kit, which is the replacement of these rubber pieces. Both of these and all the other pieces as well on the other bracket were just worn and cracked and broken out, and I just wasn't going to put them back on. So I went ahead and I ran over to the local Advanced Auto Parts, who happened to have these in stock, and I bought a new set of the front and the rear brake hardware kits. So not only do we have the new bolts now, but we also have the new rubber as well. We're going to replace the rubber. The stainless steel bracketing looks okay. I'm just going to clean it up with a wire brush. We should be good there. But I wanted to show the old versus the new caliper bolts. This is the old caliper bolt. And if you look at it, it's seriously pitted, and this is really rough when I touch it with my hands. It's completely worn out. This is the new caliper bolt, and you can see the difference on the wear. that wear right there all the way down to the end, that's what causes the brake calipers to stick and to start squeaking. Also starts, creating uneven wear on the pads themselves. So that's the reason why you always want to replace these. Once you see these start pitting like these, I mean, here's a great example on this one, and the smaller ones as well, they're just completely shot. So comparison, once you see that pitting and wearing, you got to go ahead and change these out. $16, it's just not worth it. Just go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and replace those. I'm going to go ahead and replace the rubber, and I'm going to get this cleaned up, and then I will be back in a few minutes. I've went through this caliper and I've cleaned everything. I've put in the new rubber on both sides, and I've cleaned up all the guides. Got everything in pretty good shape. And what you're looking for before you reinstall this is you're looking for play here. If I push this in, I should get a pretty good amount of play back and forth, and it should come easily. See that play? That's what you're looking for. You want that to be smooth back in and out. Should do it on its own. Okay, if it sticks anywhere in the process, then you got a problem. But that's good, it's smooth, everything's going in and out like it should. So this caliper bracket is ready to go back in, and I'm going to go ahead and mount it. Then I'll go ahead and get the other one done as well, and then I'll come back and give everyone an update. Alright, so we're ready to put the caliper bracket back on, and of course we got to take and get the new rotor as well, get that installed before we put this back on. But this is basically what it looks like now. It's all cleaned up. I've went back through, made sure that everything's good on everything here. I'm going to put a little bit of multi-purpose grease on the bolts that go back in, and then I'm going to go ahead and prepare this surface right here real quick. The reason I'm going to do that is in case I want to get the rotors off in the future. By going ahead and cleaning this up now and putting just a little bit of all-purpose grease on there, I can make it a whole lot easier for the next trip. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all prepared and get the rotor over here and get it ready, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. So we've gotten the hub ready. Got it. I went ahead and took a wire brush and I wire brushed everything down. I went ahead and applied a light coat of all-purpose grease. Went ahead and just touched up all my threads, so everything's ready to go. I've got the rotor ready, and so I'm going to go ahead and get this put on real quick. That sits up in there nice and neat. Now the two bolts that we took out earlier, I did some research on those bolts, these nuts, and the reason they were on there was for the assembly line. Whenever this vehicle was run down the assembly line and they put the rotors on, they decided they wanted to go ahead and just lock those in place. That way they wouldn't have a problem with them going down the line. As far as what we do and how these get all mangled up and get locked in, the recommendations on all the Google sites are that you just throw these away. So I'm going to go ahead and toss mine. I don't think I need it anymore, and I'll just let the weight of the rim and everything hold it on. So I'm going to discard that. But anyway, this is what it looks like when it's ready to go. Everything's been done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a cleanup job on this caliper, get it ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and retract the caliper pistons and get those in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. One tip I'll give you on this is when you're getting ready to do this, what I recommend you do is inspect these. Actually go in here, pull these back, clean these all up, just wipe it down in general, And then when you're ready to compress these pistons, what I do, and you know, it's up to you how you do it. I'm not a SAE trained mechanic, but what I do is I go find my brake reservoir, and I take the cap off my brake reservoir, and I put a clean cloth or a paper towel over it. And that way, when I compress these, it gives me room in my reservoir to let these retract. And then when you get done with the whole thing, you need to see if you need to top that off again. But just be careful not to get it contaminated. That's why I always cover it with a clean cloth or a new shop towel. You don't want anything to get into that reservoir when you got the cap off. But I went ahead and took mine off, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to retract these, clean these all up, and then I will be back in a few minutes. So I went ahead, I cleaned up the pistons, and I went ahead and cleaned everything out and just made sure that there was nothing in underneath these seals. I got everything cleaned up there, brushed everything down. I went ahead and put the rotor on, mounted the rotor, went ahead and put the caliper bracket back on, and everything looks pretty good there. So what I always tell everyone they need to do then is go ahead and get you a torque wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, go to AutoZone or Advanced Auto, Napa, wherever. They usually will rent these to you for free. Go ahead and get one, find out what the torque specification is for your particular vehicle, and go ahead and torque those bolts down in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and get that prepared. I'm going to go ahead then and get the new brake pads prepared, and then I will come back and show you how to put those on, retract the caliper, and we'll get on with this. Alright, we're back, and I went ahead and installed the new brake pads, and also I went ahead and put on some of this brake lubricant, Ultra Disc brake lubricant. You can find these at any one of your parts stores. They're usually about $1. You just want to put them on the surface areas where your caliper is actually going to make contact with the brake pad, and that'll keep them from squeaking long term. I think it's also a good thing to do. Make sure you don't get that little squeaking noise that everybody eventually gets to. So I went ahead and put that on both of these, and I went ahead and retracted my caliper. Pull this out of here. So my calipers are now fully retracted, and that's important that you make sure that you fully retract those back into the cylinders, because if you don't do that and you got these brand new brake pads, you're going to have a problem getting them on. So you want to make sure you do that. Everything's cleaned up and it's lined up, and I am ready to go ahead and put this on. I always start mine at the top, but you can do it from the top or the bottom, either one. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you're more comfortable with. So that it flows back and forth nice and stable. And on the bottom I do the same thing and make sure it's centered up. I'm going to take this one, put it in as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and work these bolts in. The bottom usually starts a lot easier than the top. Now I'm going to go ahead and check my torque wrench settings and make sure I know what those are supposed to be for this one. Then I'm going to go ahead and torque these two down, and basically this side will be done then. And then I'll go ahead and move over and finish the other side. And then I will be back when I've got them both done and got everything mounted, and we'll drop it down and go for a test. So we'll be back soon. Alright, so I've moved outside, you can see, and I've got the back rims off. I've got my jack stands in, and of course the front has now been completed, and I took it for a nice test drive and didn't have any squeaks, so I was very happy with that. But it was a pretty day, and I only have a one-car garage, so I thought I would go ahead and do the back part outside, and better light and a lot more room for me. It's kind of tough on a single-car garage. one thing I want to note to everybody that, you know, I don't have a fancy garage. I just have a one-car garage and pretty much basic tools and things that I've collected over the years. So most of these jobs I believe anybody can do. You just need to take your time. If you got any questions, I highly recommend you Google it. I do it all the time, and there's a lot of great Google movies out there and guys doing this stuff, and they're very good at it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit this with some cleaner, and then I'm going to start getting everything prepared, and then I'll be back. I've got everything set up for the back now. I've got all my tools out here. I've done my cleanup work. I've got everything positioned. I'm going to go ahead and break these back calipers out. Go ahead and take the caliper mounts off and get the rear rotors off. So I'm just going to go ahead and get to it. The back is pretty much just like the front. The only difference will be generally your size on the backs will be much smaller. Your rotors will be much smaller, or you know, noticeably smaller. Definitely your brake pad size and your caliper size are much smaller than your front. Front's, you know, probably does 70% of your stopping power, so the back's much smaller. So anyway, I'm going to just go ahead and let this run, and we'll get to it. Luckily, I didn't have to do anything with the rotor itself. I just eased it off all the way around. There wasn't anything that I had to take apart or back off as far as the emergency brake pads go, and they're in pretty good shape still. I just hit them with a little bit of sandpaper, sand block. I just went ahead and hit them with a sand block, cleaned them up, went ahead and cleaned everything else up. So I've got the new rim. I went ahead and hit it with some brake cleaner to make sure all of the factory oil and everything was off of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get that put back on, compress the caliper, clean it up a little bit, and inspect it. I'm just going to go ahead and let the video run, and we'll go from there. This is just regular standard multi-duty complex high temperature grease. You always want to use high temperature grease just in case, because these brakes can put together some pretty good heat sometimes. So you'll want to make sure you do that. And I think I've got everything in pretty good shape now. I can go ahead and put the rotor on, and it doesn't really have to match up with whatever hole. It doesn't matter. So I was able to work that back on without having to make any adjustments to it. It is still fairly tight. I may have to make some adjustments to the actual emergency brake, but I don't think so. I think it looks pretty good, but I'll test it and find out. So I'm going to go ahead and compress the caliper, check everything there, dust it off, and keep going. Always make sure you inspect around, make sure there's no debris or anything inside the cylinder. Make sure that's nice and clean in there. You don't want dirt and grime to get into this seal on this cylinder, because when you do, the back and forth motion of the brake caliper is going to ruin it. So you need to make sure that stays pretty clean. Everything all looks pretty clean here. I didn't have to suspend this because it's very short, and I could just set it right on top of there, and it's very light. This is only a single cylinder instead of a dual piston like the front, where, like I said before, the rear they probably do 25% of the stopping, so it's not a big deal there. So I've got that all back in shape, and I've got this all rebuilt, got new rubber on it, cleaned everything up, so I'm ready to go ahead and put this back on, and then we'll be ready to put the pads on. I like to start the top, you know, either one, top or bottom, just so I can have one of them in. It'll line the other one up pretty much automatically. You won't have to worry about it. So, and I don't tighten it all the way down. I just get it snugged up. I'm going in pretty easy once you lube them up and get them all clean. knock all the grime and the rust off of them, they'll generally go back in pretty easy. And once again, don't forget, once you get ready to put these bolts back in, make sure you look up the factory specification and you use a torque wrench. Okay, you want to be safe, you want to be secure, make sure you get the right torque on them, torque them out properly, especially those rear bolts on these caliper mounts, because they're critical. Also these smaller bolts here that go back in to hold the caliper in place, you can over torque these really easily if you're doing them by hand. So make sure you use torque wrench. It'll be a lot easier. I've got the brake pads back on now, and I'm going to hit them with some of the brake lubricant. I normally put it right on the caliper, that way you don't miss, because if you just coat the brake pad themselves, you know, you're really not doing yourself any good because you miss half the area. So just hit the corners of the caliper around the circle of the caliper and you got it covered. And I'll go ahead and get the caliper put back on and make sure everything's torqued down to spec, and we'll be about ready to go on this. Okay, so I have the pads all set. I went ahead and lubed the caliper. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and prepare the new pins. I'm going to go ahead and get them lubed in, put in place, and locked into the rubber. And then I'm just going to put a small amount of lubricant on the new nuts. So I'll go ahead and get that done real quick, and we'll go on to the next thing. I also, again, recommend you use Caliper Grease. It's made especially for what you're doing. It's got all the specifications for high temperature, everything you need. It's important to use the right stuff on these things. One thing I wanted to make sure I noted to everyone, if you look at this back caliper, there's a piece of metal there, there's an indention there. It's a squared off indention. That indention is where the new pin, there's a square section on the back of these new pins. Let me pull this over so you can take a look at it. You see right there, that's squared off, and that has to meet into each one of these. If you turn it up like this or a different angle and it doesn't match into there, then it's not going to get tightened up properly and it's not going to wear properly. So make sure you lock these in properly before you put your bolts on the end. Make sure you get those squared up right. Should just screw right in there by hand until you're ready to torque them down. Now I always put a little bit of grease on the end of all mine, and it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. And check the bottom, made sure that it was in the slot as well. And go ahead and get that one in there. And this one, once I torque down these bolts, this one will be finished. Then I'll go ahead and run over, do the other side, and then we'll be done with this this complete brake job. Hello everyone, and welcome back. I went ahead and finished up with the other side and put the Mazda back on the ground. I took it for a quick test drive and it drove quite well. I'll put some links in the remarks for all of the parts and everything that were used. If you like the video, please help us out and subscribe. We're really trying to get to 1,000 subscribers for the YouTube requirement, and we would really appreciate it. Y'all take care and have a great day.